My name is Lena Whitaker. I am 66. I make dresses with my hands, not machines. I carried a garment bag that weighed less than a bird, but more than my last 8 months. Harborview Hotel. Carpet quiet as snowfall. My pulse loud enough to measure each stitch I had laid at my kitchen table. I pushed the door to the bridal suite and froze. My daughter's laughter cut the air like a scissor pulled too fast. If she asks, tell her it does not fit. It looks like something from a thrift store. Another voice chimed in. Smooth, approving, perfect. We cannot risk the photos. I kept my spine. I kept my breath. The bag hung from my fingers. My palms remembered the burn of silk charmeuse. My pocket carried a small roll of acid-free tissue. Insurance for dignity. I stepped inside long enough to be seen. No one met my eyes. Corinne, the future in-law, smiled without warmth. The photographer kept clicking. The room smelled of hairspray and champagne. After spending 8 months hand-sewing my daughter's wedding dress, I stepped into the bridal suite just in time to hear her laugh. If she asks, tell her it doesn't fit. It looks like something from a thrift store. I held my pride, lifted my chin, and quietly took the dress away. But later, something unimaginable happened. I unzipped the bag. Silk slid like water finding its home. Pearls caught the light. Quiet stars begging no one. I wrapped the dress in sheets of acid-free tissue the way my mother taught me. Corners tucked like folded prayers. I did not plead. I did not explain. I nodded to my child as if we were still on the same shore. Then I turned. The hallway swallowed the noise. Carpet muffled the last click of the door. Elevator doors met like careful lips. I stared at my hands. These hands fed a family, closed a husband's eyes, hemmed uniforms for strangers who said thank you with pies on porch steps. These hands made a wedding dress that would not be worn. I thought of my sewing thimble, dented, silver, waiting in a bowl by the stove. I thought of the first time Ray pricked her finger at 7, and I slid that thimble onto her tiny hand. Pain means you wear protection. We do not throw away the needle. The elevator opened to night air. I walked to my car. A valet reached for the bag. I shook my head. I am the one who carries this. In the back seat, I laid the dress as if it were breath. Headlights flared. Rain began. My chest cooled. I had been dismissed in private. I would set my boundary in public later. For now, the only sound I allowed was the whisper of tissue. The only oath I needed was the simple lift of my chin. I drove into the dark. I drove into the dark and let the rain do the talking. By the time I reached Maple Street, the wipers had carved 2 clean lanes through my thoughts. I carried the garment bag the way you carry a sleeping child. I set it on my kitchen table, the same table that has fed every person I ever loved. I unzipped the bag. Silk breathed out. The house cooled by a degree. I washed my hands. I dried them on the thin towel that lives by the stove. Then I spread the dress flat and began to smooth the ripples with my palms, left to right, like ironing weather out of a sky. The table is my workbench. The lamp is a lighthouse with a frayed cord. The machine is a 36-year-old singer that hums like a polite bee. I set my silver thimble beside the needle tray. The dent on its rim fits the pad of my middle finger. Next to it, I placed my button tin. It used to hold peppermints. Now it holds years. When I pop the lid, the smell is metal and starch and a little salt. Under the tin, leaning against the flour canister, rests my wedding photo. The frame is cheap. The print is fogged. There's a water stain shaped like a thumb at my collarbone. You can tell where the pearls were taken off. The light has nowhere to sit. 8 months ago, I bought charmeuse by the yard. 1 week, I bought half a yard and told myself it was a treat. I basted hand-rolled hems until my knuckles stiffened. I rolled silk over itself with a needle so fine it sang. I built French seams because I have a superstition about hidden strength. The outside should be clean because the inside is clean. I wrote hours in pencil in the margin of a grocery list. 15 here, 9 there, another 20 during the storm when the power flickered and I stitched by battery lantern. When I pressed the princess seams, I used the tail of a wooden spoon as a clapper. You work with the life you have. The pearls came from 2 places. Years back, at the hospital, a clerk slid a clipboard toward me. The total toppled me without raising its voice. I drove to the notary. I took the spare key off the nail by the door. I handed a man my sedan and watched him drive my husband's last road away. That night, I sat here and clipped pearls from my wedding bodice and sold half of them to a woman who paid in folded bills. The rest I kept in the tin because I am my mother's daughter, and we always keep a little light. This winter, I rinsed those pearls in warm soap. I dried them on a dish towel. I stitched them on one by one while the radio read the weather. When Ray was 7, she wanted to sew like me. She pushed a needle and the needle bit back. She sucked her finger and looked at me as if the thread had betrayed her. I dried the blood with my shirt. I slid the thimble onto her tiny finger. I said, "Pain means you wear the thimble. You do not throw away the needle." She nodded and tried again. Tonight, I turn the thimble in my hand and feel that old sentence return to me like a tide. I am cold. The house is quiet. The dress is an ocean I have learned to cross. I fold it back into acid-free paper. I close the tin. I straighten the photo. I sit and breathe as if breathing were work, because it is. I stayed at the table after folding the dress. The lamp hummed and the house settled. My phone face down near the button tin buzzed once. Voicemail. Ray. 7 seconds. Time stamped 20 minutes. After Harborview. I did not plan to listen. I pressed play anyway. Pride can lift a chin, but it cannot plug a human ear. A bathroom fan whirred through the speaker. Tile echoed. Running water tapped like pins in a dish. Then her voice, smaller than I have heard since 2nd grade. "Mom, I am scared. His mother says the pictures have to be perfect. Please do not." The clip ended with a polite chime, as if a door had closed without touching the frame. I kept the phone in my hand and felt the heat of it. The blue light made my wedding photo look colder. The water stain at my collarbone turned the color of old nickel. I heard 2 truths sitting side by side. My child is afraid. My work was dismissed. The fan on her end kept spinning in my head. It sounded like a sewing machine refusing to stop even when the foot lifts. I wanted to drive back, take her out of that room, wrap her in the wool coat she always steals from my closet in December. I wanted to pull the pins from this day and start again, but I also felt the clean edge of a new seam inside me, a boundary I had basted at the elevator and now needed to stitch. If I called, I would become the seam ripper on myself. I would undo hours of quiet. I would teach both of us that disrespect can be refunded on demand. Pain means you wear the thimble. You do not throw away the needle. I heard my own sentence and rested my thumb against the dented rim. It fit. It always has. I set the phone screen down beside the thimble and the tin. I let the message sit where I keep light and steel. I did not delete it. I did not replay it. I let it be incomplete, the way truth often is when fear edits the ending. In the silence after, I brewed tea and listened to steam rise. I tucked the dress deeper into its paper nest. Between mercy and dignity, I chose both. I called no one. I slept with the lamp off and my chin still lifted. By late afternoon, the house had settled into its chilly quiet. A knock startled the spoon in my teacup. I opened the door to heat and rosemary. Nora Kim stood there with a foil pan balanced in both hands. Her cheeks were pink from the weather and the oven. I stepped aside and the scent of roast chicken traveled ahead of her like a memory you want to keep. She set the pan on the stove. She took one breath. Then she saw the dress on the table. Her posture changed. The chatter in her shoulders went still. She did not rush closer. She asked, "May I?" I nodded. She circled the table the way you walk a shoreline, palms hovering, careful not to snag silk with a ring. The low light through the west window ran across the pearls. They flickered like minnows. Nora leaned in and traced the air above a seam. Her mouth shaped the words without sound. Hand rolled. French. Princess. Lines. She glanced at the machine, at my battered seam ripper, at the wooden spoon I use as a clapper. It was like watching someone read a language you had written in a diary. She touched the inside of the bodice where the seam, allowance lies flat, clean as a promise. She whispered that word, clean. She did not ask for the story. She recognized the hours. That is a mercy of its own. She sniffed and made a joke about onions. Neither of us laughed. The pearls caught another stripe of sun, and the room felt warmer by a notch. She opened the foil pan and slid a drumstick onto a plate. Eat while it is hot. Then, as if airtime were expensive, she said that her cousin Danielle Ortiz was getting married in 2 weeks. Backyard, folding chairs, string lights from the hardware store, a dress budget that could barely feed guests. Nora's voice stayed level, but the space between her words carried an old bruise. She said Danny is the kind of person who brings Tupperware for leftovers and returns it with cookies, that if a dress could understand a life, this one might. I looked at the neckline I had shaped with my thumbs, at the pearls I had kept back when I sold the car, at the photo with its water stain near my collarbone. The chicken steamed. My window fogged a little at the corners. I told Nora she could invite Danielle to stop by after work. I would make tea. We would measure in the kitchen. The afternoon light is kind to honest fabric and honest faces. Danielle came after work with a tote bag and the kind of tired that sits kindly on a face. She smelled faintly of flour and street air. Nora hung her coat. I handed over the hanger as if I were passing a secret across a counter. In the kitchen, I unzipped the garment bag. Silk answered with that small sigh it makes when it remembers it is silk. Danny's hands hovered before she touched. She asked if she should wash them. I nodded toward the sink. She scrubbed like a careful cook. She dried on the towel by the stove. We moved slowly. Hooks. Eyes. A whisper of zipper, the polite shiver of charmeuse over cotton slip. The room changed temperature when the bodice found her shoulders. She faced the mirror I keep propped against the pantry. The glass has a scratch across the lower right corner. The scratch drew a pale line through the reflection of the hem, like a horizon. For a beat, we only listened. Silk against skin is not loud. It is more like a word remembered. The fabric settled. The seams I had hidden did their work. The weight of the skirt redistributed itself from hanger to hip. A life caught and then held. Danny lifted her chin the way women do when they have carried groceries, toddlers, and deadlines in the same week. The neckline honored her collarbones. The waist remembered dinners at her mother's. The fall of the skirt left room for dancing in shoes that would be kicked off by 10. Her eyes shined in a way that had nothing to do with glamour. She took one breath and it landed lower, a breath that belonged to someone safe in her own shape. I watched the dress behave like a person who knew the house. It did not perform. It fit. It kept quiet promises. Nora stood to the side, hands clasped, the way you stand in a pew when a hymn begins without you. Late light slid through the west window. It caught on the pearls and stepped across them one by one. Nora lifted her phone and glanced at me. No words, only a question in the tilt of her chin. She took a single photo, no filter, kitchen light, honest glass. She whispered that her friends should see that real craft still lives at a table. I did not grant permission. I did not take it away. I let the moment stand in its own close while the shutter clicked once and the room remembered to breathe. By morning, the kitchen smelled like coffee and starch. Nora's photo must have traveled farther than her promise, because my phone lit up in a quiet, steady rhythm. I pulled the spiral notebook from the bread box and sharpened nothing. The pencil was already worn to a polite stub. I opened to a clean page and wrote the date in the margin. Then I read the first message like a fingertip tests a seam. Hi, Lena. My name is Carol. 58. Department store said the cut I wanted is not on trend for my age. Do you take fittings at a kitchen table? I printed Carol in block letters. I underlined once. From Maureen, lumpectomy last year. I wear a foam form on the left and hate how jackets collapse. Do you build structure from the inside? I wrote Maureen. I added a small star in the margin. From Dana, wide ribs from scoliosis. Salesgirl told me to try shapewear. I cried in my car. Can you measure without mirrors? Dana, second star. From Patrice, teacher, prom chaperone dress. Zipper should survive cafeteria duty and a fire drill. Patrice. I circled the word teacher. They kept coming. A woman who uses a wheelchair and wants a skirt that does not pool under the knees. A grandmother whose hands shake and needs buttons she can manage without a prayer. A postal clerk who is between sizes and tired of being told to pick a lane. A breast cancer survivor who refuses to hide her scar and asks me to make it part of a neckline on purpose. I wrote each name in the notebook. I left space under everyone for measurements and notes. The pencil did not complain. It simply gave what it had. Between messages, I sipped coffee. The mug warmed my fingers. The table felt steady under my forearms. The rhythm of reading and writing began to sound like a machine that knows the song. A boutique had told one woman her body was a problem to solve. A chain store had told another that her waist belonged to last season. My notebook told no one to adjust their life to the hanger. I added a simple heading at the top of the page. Waiting list, kitchen fittings, Tuesdays and Thursdays. 17 names filled the paper by noon. Graphite smudged the side of my hand. Hope smudged something brighter. I closed the notebook and tapped the spine twice on the table, the way my mother used to seal an envelope. Brick by brick, line by line, we were laying a small road back to dignity. The notebook lay closed under my palm when the phone rang with an unfamiliar number. A careful voice introduced himself as Ethan Cole from the Harbor County Gazette and asked if he could stop by for a short piece about local makers. He arrived with a small camera, an old reporter's notebook, and a politeness that fit the room. I put the kettle on. Steam lifted like a white ribbon in winter air. He glanced at the singer from 1987 and smiled the way people smile at a car that has outlived 3 owners. He asked if he could record. I nodded. He pressed a button, then asked the simplest question I have ever been given. Where did you learn to sew? I set my thimble between us like a handshake and said, at this table and from my mother's hands. He wrote the sentence down exactly and underlined mother once. He did not ask for tragedy. He asked for details. I gave him cloth. I showed him a hand-rolled hem on a strip of charmeuse. The needle barely pierced the edge. The thread kissed and hid. I opened the button tin. He leaned in as if listening could make him see better. He noticed the dent on the thimble and the seam gauge with a nick like a crescent moon. He asked what a French seam feels like. I told him it feels like 2 people agreeing in private. The kettle sang. I poured tea. Heat fogged his glasses for a second, and he laughed, then apologized for laughing, which made me trust him more. His camera did not love faces. It loved hands and tools and the old machine's enamel chips. He took a picture of my palms resting on the tabletop, a thread across the knuckles like a lifeline. He asked for one more sentence to end his piece. I said, clothes should meet a life where it lives. I stitch for the lives I can see. He thanked me. He packed his notebook. He left with the gentle steps of someone leaving a sleeping child. The article ran the next morning above the fold of the community page. A photo of my hands, the machine in soft focus, steam from a kettle turned to light. The caption held my sentence about my mother. Seeing it printed felt like a small lamp being switched on over my table. By noon, a voicemail waited from Grace at St. Matthew's. Would I take a corner at the church fair? 1 card table, 1 extension cord, 1 sign. I set the kettle back on and said yes to the empty room, and the room said yes back. The phone rang while I was basting a muslin sample for the church fair. The singer hummed. My needle moved like a metronome. I answered with my shoulder. The thread kept sliding until Ray said, "We should talk strategy," and the needle stopped in mid-air as if it heard a command. I set it down so the point would not bruise the wood. She sounded brisk, the voice she uses for meetings. I saw your article. Congratulations are in order. Now we need to optimize. Hand sewing is beautiful, Mom, but it is not scalable. You should switch to synthetics. They press well. No one can tell in photos. Brides want the look, not the labor. If you shorten the process and order trims wholesale, you will keep up with demand. Corinne knows vendors. She can connect you. We can put together a package and maybe hire a fitter to speed up intake. Also, you should phase out the kitchen table. It looks unprofessional online. I looked at my table, at the dent where years of pins have taught the grain to yield, at the seam, gauge, with its crescent nick. I let her words land without rushing to catch them. I asked, "What demand are you referring to?" She said, "The attention from the article. It will spike for a week. You need to capitalize. After that, the window closes. The market moves. If you do not adapt, you will not keep up." She used we as if we had drafted a plan together. I said, "I keep up with my life." She paused, then laughed softly, the way people laugh at a detour sign. This is not about feelings. It is about efficiency. I heard a second voice in her room, a chair scraped, a whisper that sounded like Corinne. I said, "My work is handwork. The time is part of the garment." She replied, "Time is cost. cost is barrier. You will price yourself out. I answered, cost is respect. Respect keeps a dress standing when the music ends. She softened her tone. Mom, I am trying to help. I do not want you to be overwhelmed or taken advantage of. I looked at the needle resting on the seam allowance. It pointed toward the thimble like a compass. I said, your help asks me to become a different maker. She said, a better business. I said, a smaller soul. Silence adjusted its chair between us. I thanked her for calling. I told her I would keep my process. I told her my kitchen table stays until it decides to retire. She exhaled. You are being stubborn. The world is fast now. I said, my life is not late. It is mine. I hung up gently. I threaded the needle again. The singer resumed its quiet song. The singer kept time while I made a different kind of seam. I walked into the free legal aid office with a tote bag and a list. Fluorescent lights, a plastic pen on a chain, a bulletin board full of clinics for taxes and tenants. A woman at the desk slid me an intake form and a yellow folder. The folder felt like a small door. I wrote my name in careful letters. I wrote Lamplight Atelier on the line that asked for proposed business. A volunteer attorney named Marla called me back. She wore sensible shoes and a kindness that did not waste words. Where do you work? She asked. At my kitchen table, I said. Then we will make the table official. We filed the LLC with the state. She clicked through screens. I paid the fee with a debit card that has survived 3 refrigerators. She applied for an employer identification number while I read a pamphlet about separating business and personal accounts. The pamphlet used the phrase, clean books. I liked the sound of it. It matched my seams. Marla typed a letter for a bank. A confirmation page printed. The printer coughed like an old dog. She paper-clipped everything into the yellow folder and tapped the stack straight. At the credit union down the street, I opened a business account. The clerk congratulated me in a voice you might use for a new baby. I signed 3 times and received a checkbook that said Lamplight. The word looked right. I took the bus home and set the folder on the table like a pie cooling. Nora came over with her laptop and a ruler. We built a rate sheet together. Materials listed by fabric type, labor by hour, fittings included, alterations billed fairly. I wrote in ink that deposits are 40%, non-refundable after fabric is cut, lead time 6 to 8 weeks, rush fees available but rare. At the bottom, I added 1 sentence in bold. We do not accept payment in exposure. Nora grinned. Post it, she said. I took a photo of the rate sheet against the wood grain and shared it with a caption that tasted like clear water. Craft is work. Work is paid. Kindness is extra. The replies arrived in 2 flavors, applause and advice. A stranger wrote that artists should be grateful for visibility. I replied that visibility does not pay rent. Another asked for a friends and family discount. I answered that every client is family once measured. I slid the yellow folder into the bread box next to the notebook. I brewed tea. I listened to the kettle sing. Then I threaded the needle again. My table had a name. My work had a boundary. My hands kept the beat. Mr. Miguel Alvarez arrived with a canvas roll under his arm and a pocket full of finishing nails. Retired sign painter, steady hands, eyes that still measured without a ruler. He smelled faintly of linseed and coffee. I cleared the end of the kitchen table. He unrolled brushes like a surgeon laying out instruments. Flats and sign quills, and a maul stick polished by years of balance. From behind his back, he lifted a plank of planed pine. pale gold grain ran like water under skin. He tapped the board with a knuckle. "Good voice," he said. "It will carry." He chalked a guideline, then another, then stood back and squinted through a thumb and forefinger window. "What do you want them to know before they knock?" he asked. I set my thimble on the plank the way you set a paperweight on a letter you do not want to blow away. "That this is work for real lives," I said. He nodded. He sketched an L that curled like a ribbon caught on a fence. He mixed paint in a tuna can. One part lamp black, a whisper of raw umber, a drop of Japan dryer. The kitchen filled with the clean old scent of oil. He loaded a quill and began at the top left corner. Strokes confident, no stutter. Each pull of the brush a breath he had practiced for 50 years. The letters stood up as he made them. Lamplight Atelier. He read aloud as if tasting the weight. He separated the words with a quiet dot. Underneath, he lettered the line I had said once and then believed. "Made for the life you really live." While the paint tacked, he burnished the edges with a rag and a little patience. Outside, he held the sign to the porch post and marked the screw holes with a finish nail. He whistled once, a barber, shop note, and set the screws by hand. Pine met cedar. The sign found its pitch. We stepped back to the sidewalk. Afternoon light warmed the black to a soft brown. The letters looked older than an hour and younger than a day. A neighbor paused with her dog and read it out loud. The dog sat. The woman smiled without asking questions. Miguel brushed a speck of sawdust from the lower serif. "Now anyone who walks up knows they belong," he said. I felt the kitchen become a doorway. I felt the work lift its head. The wind slid under the porch, and the sign answered with a small wooden note that sounded like yes. The sign had hardly finished drying when my first appointment rang the bell. A small woman in a slate shawl, silver hair braided like a crown, eyes bright as a new pin. She introduced herself as Neela Patel, 70, a winter birthday, a summer surgery. She kept one hand on her left side the way you rest a palm on a sleeping cat. Affectionate, protective. I offered tea. She asked for half a spoon of sugar. We sat until the cup stopped steaming. Then we stood where the light is honest. I measured with the soft tape I keep coiled like a tame snake. Shoulder to shoulder, hollow to hem, rib to rib. When I reached the scar, she lifted her chin. "I do not want to pretend," she said. "I do not want to announce either." I nodded and laid the tape flat over the ridge. Tissue shifted under the cotton. My hands moved slow enough to tell the truth without startling it. I traced a new princess seam on muslin. I added breathing room where the radiation had left tender map lines. I angled darts like quiet hands offering support rather than correction. We tried the first mock-up. The mirror listened. The room held its breath with us. The neckline curved a fraction toward the side that had changed. Not to hide, to honor. I marked with chalk, front, back, side. I wrote the notes twice as if writing them into a prayer. For closure, I chose fabric-covered buttons. Small, soft discs that weigh less than a word. A row that would march down the back with purpose but never clatter. She flexed her fingers and smiled. Buttons she could manage on her own good days. A loop she could slip off on the harder ones. When she changed back into her shawl, she touched the muslin and said it felt like someone had listened without asking for a speech. I wrapped the pattern pieces with tissue. I tucked them into a manila envelope with her name. The pencil left a gentle groove. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Thin paper, square handwriting that leaned forward. She had enclosed a photo. herself in the finished dress, standing by a pillbox the size of a small brick. A hand on her hip, the other raised as if catching a beam of light. The buttons marched in their quiet line, the neckline held like a promise kept. Thank you for sewing for the life I have, not the body I used to borrow, she wrote. I slid the letter into my button tin and closed the lid. Inside, steel and pearl and ink settled. Together, healing flowed backward through the hinge. The church fair smelled like cinnamon and floor wax. St. Matthew's Gymnasium wore its Sunday best streamers and its weekday scuffs at the same time. I set my card table under the basketball hoop. One extension cord. The singer purring like it remembered school dances. Grace handed me a paper name tag. Lena, black marker letters. Beneath it she wrote Lamplight Atelier in smaller script that looked like careful stitching. On the table, I laid a muslin bodice, a strip of hand-rolled hem, a small board with 3 seam finishes. Beside them, my yellow folder and a plate of shortbread I had cut with a thimble for a cutter. Across the room, pies competed for attention. Apple, pecan. Something custard set in a cheerful wobble. Kids ran relay through chair legs. A man in a veteran's cap studied a birdhouse shaped like a lighthouse. People drifted. They came near and put their hands just above the fabric. They did not touch. They asked if touching was allowed. I said yes. Cloth is meant for living. A woman traced the invisible ridge of a French seam and whispered that it felt like a secret kept kindly. Another asked about buttons she could fasten on a cold morning. I showed fabric-covered discs that behave even when fingers tremble. Grace tapped the microphone on the small stage. Feedback sighed. The room gathered its edges. She thanked the bakers and the quilters and the boy who hauled the coffee urn without a spill. Then she said a sentence that crossed the gym like a warm front. Today, we honor the hands that built whole families, hands that fed, mended, lifted, forgave, and kept the lamp on when the power blinked. Applause rose, not the sharp kind, the kind that lasts a little too long because people recognize themselves. I felt my throat tighten the way thread does when it catches on a rough spot. I swallowed. I kept smiling. Across the aisle, Mrs. Nguyen from the post office raised 2 fingers at me. Her knuckles were taped. She ordered a skirt that would not argue with her chair. Mr. Alvarez stood by my sign like a proud uncle. He tapped the lower serif with one fingertip and nodded as if the word lamplight were a hymn. Ethan Cole stopped by with his notebook half closed. He asked how the morning felt. I pointed to the seam board and said it felt like this, simple, strong on the inside. A teenager with glitter on her cheeks tried the hand-rolled hem sampler and whispered that she could hear the stitch. I told her the stitch could hear her back. Someone dropped a fork. A baby laughed. A hymnline drifted in from an open door and braided itself through the gym's noise. A woman with a scarf tied like armor came forward and asked if I took measurements in public. I said we could step into the coat room where the light is gentle. She exhaled like a seam released. We set a time. For a few breaths, I saw the Harbor View hallway again, the closed door, the careful lips of the elevator. Then I looked at my name tag and my machine and the line waiting for sign-ups. Private dismissal had met public welcome. The room said yes. My table said yes back. After the church fair, I took a photo of my rate sheet against the wood grain. Ink steady. Corners weighted by my thimble and the button tin. I typed a caption that read like a contract and a kindness. Deposits are 40%. Non-refundable after fabric is cut. Lead time 6 to 8 weeks. Rush fees by availability. We do not accept payment in exposure. All clients are scheduled in order. We do not offer family and friends discounts. Families have used my hands for free long enough. I pinned the post to the top of my page and set the phone face down so the tea could steep without interruption. It did not steep alone. The screen lit with hearts and red faces. The modern chorus. A cousin of someone's cousin wrote, "Blood deserves a break. Your mother gave you a life. You owe it back." A teacher replied, "I grade my students. I do not grade my relatives for free. Labor is love and rent." Someone asked if I was talking about a particular child. I did not answer. The policy was general because boundaries are general, or they fail. A man with a profile photo of a car lectured me about business models. Offer a friends tier to build loyalty. Loss leaders pay later. Ask any consultant. A woman posted a selfie in a dress that did not fit and wrote that her sister always got the discount while she paid full price. Maybe fairness is cheaper in the long run. The icons stacked, the thread unspooled. The algorithm ferried my kitchen table to a neighborhood group, and then to the church page, and then to a forum with more rules than a homeowners association. I read every comment with the same care I use for a seam. I did not tug. I let the fabric tell me where it wants to lie. When someone accused me of ingratitude, I answered with 12 words. Every client is family once measured. Every body deserves the same respect. When another demanded a family price, I wrote, "Discounts belong to the person who does the work. I choose equity." When a stranger declared that art is a gift, not a commodity, I typed, "Craft is bread. Bread is baked. Flour is weighed. Ovens cost money." Ray texted a screenshot with no caption. I felt my jaw set. Then I let it unclench. I wrote back a single line. "Policies protect us both." She did not reply. A minute later, another red face popped under the pinned post, and then 3 hearts. The world is a scale that never stops twitching. By evening, the thread had braided itself into something less angry and more useful. A nurse wrote that she would rather pay full price and know that the next woman in line is not being bumped for someone's niece. A deacon from St. Matthew's commented, "The fare fed us. Paying the baker keeps the oven lit." I hearted that one and went back to the singer. The needle found rhythm. The machine held steady. The storm on the screen blew itself east. My table kept its name. My hands kept their wage. My page kept the post pinned where anyone could see it before they knocked. The storm on my screen had blown east, but a different front rolled in at the table. Friday, 9 at night. Ceremony, Saturday at 2. Danny slipped into the dress for a final check, and the invisible zipper sang halfway, then choked. I felt the slider catch. A coil tooth lay bent like a grain in the wrong direction. I lowered the tab. The coil refused to re-engage. The zipper tape rippled where the waist seam meets the side notch. I told Danny to breathe and step out. I set the dress flat with the zipper side up. I turned my thimble so the dent kissed the pad of my middle finger. My other hand reached for the seam ripper that has more miles than my car. Nora hovered with a flashlight like a nurse. I nodded once. We slowed everything down. "No rushing," I said. "Haste makes crooked stitches and loud regrets." I clipped each backstitch with the tiny hook of the ripper. The sound was a quiet series of yeses. Shears whispered against thread tails. The singer clicked as I turned the handwheel to lift the needle out of our way. I taught Nora to count stitches as she lifts them. Never pull a whole inch. Free one and let the fabric tell you the next. She breathed in sync with me. The room narrowed to cloth, light, and the steady tap of the needle against the plate as if impatient to return to work. The zipper came out without a tantrum. I pressed the seam allowances open with the iron and my wooden spoon as a clapper. Steam rose and settled. The fabric remembered its schooling. From the notions box, I pulled a new invisible zipper in the right shade, coil aligned, tape true, beeswax across the thread, a knot no bigger than a rice grain. I basted by hand along the coil with a pick stitch. Forward a hair, back a whisper, each bite shallow so the front stayed clean. Nora watched the needle enter and leave like a disciplined swimmer. She tried. Her first stitch went too deep. I tapped the thimble once on the table. She adjusted. She smiled without looking up. We set the zipper foot and stitched from neck to notch in one continuous breath. At the waist seam, I paused, lifted, sank again. Crossing a seam is crossing a street. I anchored the top with a handbar tack. I added a hook and eye for insurance because weddings ask more of closures than any ordinary Saturday. The zipper tab slid. The coil purred. No choke, no ripple. I pressed the whole length with the iron's nose and the spoon. Steam sighed, silk settled. Danny stepped back in. Nora held the base of the zipper tape while I guided the tab. The dress swallowed the last inch like a pleased cat. Silence held for 3 beats. Then I rapped the thimble twice on the table, a small drum. Crisis over, I said. We still test the dance. Danny took 3 steps, turned, reached up and down. The zipper behaved like good manners. The clock said 11. The room smelled of warm silk and a line of steam. Nora exhaled and shook out her hands. I showed her the dent on the thimble. Damage is history, not weakness. She touched the dent with a fingertip as if reading Braille. Then she repeated my rhythm against the tabletop. Tap, tap, back to work. After the zipper test, I checked the skirt one last time. The constellation of pearls near the left hip needed a final star to balance the line I had mapped. I opened the button tin and sifted with my fingertip. Steel and mother of pearl made their soft arithmetic. The right size was easy. The right tone was not. Charmeuse takes light like skin. A pearl that is a shade too cool will read like a small unkindness. I held one against the fabric, and the dress said no. I held another, and the dress said almost. The tin emptied to its round echo. Nothing left that matched the warm ivory I had used along the bodice. Nora watched me read the tray. She did not speak. Danny stood in her slip and slippers, hair clipped up in a jaw clip like a bird's open beak. She pressed her hands together the way people pray without naming it. I checked the saucer where I keep stray beads. I checked the lip of the sewing box where things like to hide. I crouched and listened for the click a pearl makes when it rolls and meets the baseboard. The room answered with quiet. On the peg by the door hung a raincoat the color of late pears. Ray's. She had worn it weeks ago when she dropped off a bundle of old table linens she thought I could cut into muslin. She had hung the coat and forgotten it in the weather of our distance. I reached without meaning to. Habit more than hope. My hand slid into the pocket and found a hard, round whisper. It turned under my nail and gave that small tap that belongs only to a pearl. I cupped it into the light. Warm ivory, nearly luminous. I did not ask how it came to live there. Perhaps she picked it up from my floor on some earlier visit and pocketed it the way you pocket a button while talking. Perhaps she found it at Harborview after I left and could not bring herself to throw it away. Perhaps none of that matters. I set the pearl on the table, and the room felt a degree warmer. I threaded a fine needle with silk thread waxed over a cake of beeswax. I anchored inside the seam allowance so no knot would show. I placed the pearl where the line needed it. Not the center, the anchor. I took 2 passes through the hole and a third for superstition. I whispered, "Stay," and the pearl behaved like an obedient thought. The dress exhaled. Even Danny heard it. She smiled and did not ask. Nora met my eyes. I shook my head. "Not now." She nodded. The act was smaller than apology and larger than indifference. It was a quiet allowance handed to the future. A single beat of yes inside a day that had taught me to say no. Danny stepped back into the dress. The new pearl caught the light from the lamp and then released it gently, the way a good memory glows without burning. I pressed the skirt with the iron's nose and used the wooden spoon as a clapper. Steam rose. Silk settled. I slid the raincoat off the peg and brushed a thread from the sleeve. I hung it back. I told Danny we were ready for morning. I told Nora to put the tin away. I told myself that forgiveness can be measured in grains and stitches, not declared, placed. The house cooled and kept us while the last inch of night finished hemming itself. Morning stepped in like a careful guest. The house still smelled faintly of steam and beeswax. I laid the dress cover over the mannequin and opened the door for the mail. On the top of the stack sat an envelope the color of cream, heavy, the flap sealed with a small circle of clear wax. The corner bore an embossed county crest you can feel before you see. Harbor County, Arts and Heritage Council, raised letters, clean impression. I set it on the table and waited the length of one breath, the way I wait before sinking a needle. I cut the envelope open with my old butter knife. The paper answered with a soft tear that felt like cloth giving permission. Inside, a single sheet with a border of faint laurel, typeset straight, my name centered. Dear Ms. Whitaker, we are pleased to inform you that your work has been nominated for Craftsperson of the Year. Would you consider a small display and a brief demonstration at the County Hall on Saturday next? Please bring the tools that made the work as well as the work itself. I read the sentence again and let each word find its chair. Ms. Whitaker, work, nominated. My eyes jumped ahead to the last paragraph. We were moved by the Gazette profile, the image of your hands, and the phrase about stitching for the lives you can see. Recognition came from a place where I did not have to argue for it. The sheet carried a faint powder scent from the envelope. The crest left a dent where my thumb rested. I stood without thinking. My shoulders pulled back the way I pull a seam straight before a final press. The curve in my upper spine softened. Breath moved lower. My ribs felt like a good bodice looks. I caught my reflection in the oven door. Not younger, not different, simply aligned. Private dismissal had shifted into public invitation. My body understood before my mind wrote it down. Nora came in with a grocery sack and stopped when she saw the crest. Her grin started at her eyes. I handed her the letter and she read it aloud as if reading a toast. She wrapped me in a kitchen hug and then tapped the table twice with her knuckles. Our new superstition. Mr. Alvarez appeared at the porch rail a minute later, tools still in his pocket, called by nothing more than the tone of our voices. He ran a thumb over the embossed seal and nodded like a man approving a straight plumb line. The sign out front lifted a little in the breeze, and answered with its small, wooden yes. I wrote a reply on my best paper and signed with the steady hand the singer has trained. I listed the tools I would bring: the thimble with the dent, the seam gauge with the crescent nick, a strip of hand-rolled, hem to pass around the room so people could feel what quiet looks like. I added a note that I would demonstrate an invisible zipper because closures matter when life is expected to hold. When I slid my letter into its envelope, I felt the same satisfaction as when a lining clicks into place without a wrinkle. I placed the county invitation in my yellow folder, behind the bank letter and the LLC filing. Paper against paper, proof against proof. I brewed tea. The kettle's lift sounded like a curtain rising. I tasted the first sip standing up. My spine kept its new line. Outside, a neighbor walked by, read the sign aloud, and waved as if the name belonged to the whole block. I waved back and reached for my needle. Ray asked to meet at a cafe near the courthouse. Glass walls, small tables, the kind of place where spoons sound like silver even when they are not. I arrived first and chose a two-top by the window. Outside, the county crest sat on a banner for the arts event. Inside, a barista carved hearts into milk. When Ray came in, she looked like she had not slept. Perfect hair can still carry a worry. We ordered. My tea steamed. Her espresso sat dark and still. She never touched it. She began with a compliment about the invitation. Then she folded her hands and practiced a sentence that had been edited by committee. Mom, Corinne thinks we should standardize our family image. We are joining several philanthropic boards. Your recent story is creating an unpredictable narrative. She paused and watched my face the way a driver watches a yellow light. She added that the Harborview incident had become gossip at the club, that a cousin had forwarded the church fair video with commentary, that donors have delicate appetites for scandal. I thought of that hallway, the careful lips of the elevator doors, the dress breathing in tissue. I asked what standardize means in our case. Ray said it means no more interviews without media training, no posts that reference family conflict, no rate sheets with bold sentences about exposure, definitely no mention of names. Corinne believes the wedding dress angle feels hostile. We should position your work as a charming retirement hobby, maybe frame it as community service. She can help rebrand the page. The espresso sent up one thin ribbon of scent. Then it cooled. I noticed Ray's thumb worrying the edge of her napkin, a tell from childhood when spelling tests were timed. She said she was stuck. She respected what I was building. She also understood how fast a reputation can bruise in rooms where everyone smiles. Corinne grew up poor. She stitched her life together by choosing right forks and right friends. She is good at rules. Rules kept her safe. It was the first time Ray had offered context instead of a command. I turned my cup to warm my palms and studied my child's face. She was not a villain in a velvet chair. She was a person threading a needle in a moving car. I could acknowledge the tremor without handing over the wheel. I said that my work is not a hobby. It is how I pay for groceries and dignity. I said that narratives are only unpredictable to people who do not listen. Anyone who places a finger on a seam can feel exactly how it was made. I said that I would speak without blaming and that I could promise no names. I could not promise silence. Ray's shoulders slumped an inch. She did not argue. She asked if I would at least postpone the county hall demonstration until the murmurs died. I told her murmurs never die. They molt and return. Meanwhile, a woman waits for a jacket that respects her chest. A teacher waits for a zipper that survives a fire drill. The espresso sat untouched between us, like a dark opinion. Mine had cooled to drinkable. I sipped. She nodded, a small nod, like someone agreeing to try a different road though the map is smudged. She said Corinne would be disappointed. I said disappointment is a garment adults can hem for themselves. Outside, the banner lifted in a breeze and settled again. Ray reached for the cup, thought better, and set her hand flat on the table instead. "Thank you for hearing me," she said. I told her I had heard. I did not bend the sign on my porch. 2 days before the county hall event, the mail slot clapped and a thick envelope landed on the rug. White stock, window pane, a red postmark haloed the corner like a warning light. I recognized the tone before I read a word. Inside, on letterhead with a serif that meant budget, a firm representing Boutique 5, asserted that my recent public statements and the comments under them created harmful comparisons. They demanded that I remove posts, refrain from disparagement, and acknowledge their client's reputation. The phrases were familiar: cease, desist, otherwise. I set the letter on the table beside my yellow folder and my thimble. I boiled water. I read it again while the kettle settled. No one mentioned my name at Harborview. No one mentioned theirs in my posts. Strangers on the internet had drawn lines between handmade and showroom and tugged. The letter treated that tug as my hand. Panic is loud. I did not invite it in. Nora came through the door with paper cups and a knuckle knock. She saw the letter, her mouth flattened. She pulled out her phone. "I will call Marla," she said. "The legal clinic owes us a favor." 10 minutes later, we had a video square of Marla at a desk stacked with forms and Mercy. She asked for a clean scan. I held each page to the window and photographed it. The afternoon light printed through the paper like an X-ray. Marla read in silence. Lawyers know how to read with their jaw. "Here's what we do," she said. "You respond in writing. Polite, precise. Not an inch of apology for things you did not do. You do not delete unless something you posted is false. You state that your business has never referenced Boutique 5 by name, that your rate sheet contains no comparisons, that you do not control third-party comments, that you moderate for profanity and threats. You invite them to identify any specific statement they believe is defamatory so you can review it. You reserve your right to speak about your own work and process." She offered to draft. I asked to write the first paragraph in my own words. I opened a fresh document and pictured the county seal on my nomination letter. Paper can hold both pressure and praise. "Dear Counsel," I typed, "thank you for your letter regarding my small business, Lamplight Atelier. I honor the work of all makers. I do not compare my garments to any boutique or brand. My posts describe my process, pricing, and policies so clients can make informed decisions. I do not endorse or author third-party comparisons in comments. I remove abusive speech as I see it. If you believe a specific statement of mine is false, please identify it by date and link. I will review promptly. Otherwise, I will continue to speak truthfully about my own work. Respectfully, Lena Whitaker." Marla tightened the language. Nora proofed commas. I printed on my good paper. The printer coughed. The ink bit. We mailed it certified at the post office. The clerk stamped the receipt. The rubber thud felt like a gavel scaled for a kitchen. Back home, I posted a calm note without names. Lamplight celebrates craft. We speak for our work. We do not speak against others. Comments will be moderated. The rate sheet stands. The thread lit again. People have a talent for heat. Big stores bullying small hands, someone wrote. I answered with one sentence. No one bullies the work when the work knows its name. Then I muted the thread and basted a hem. The red postmark sat on the corner of the envelope like a badge I did not ask for. The needle tapped the plate. The house breathed. The boundary held. Ray chose a quiet bistro with linen napkins folded into perfect squares. A place where success performs like a well-trained violin. She arrived with a leather folio and the shine of purpose. I arrived with my yellow folder and a pen that writes even when held upside down. The server poured water. The ice clicked against the glass. Ray opened the folio and spread a one-page plan between the bread plate and the salt. Here is how we scale, she said. Synthetic blends for the base. Hand finishing only at visible points. Subcontract hems. Templates for common sizes. Volume pricing. A social package that highlights smiling brides. A guarantee that reads like a promise even when it is not. Corinne can introduce you to wholesalers. We can lease a small showroom. The kitchen table is sentimental, but a showroom sells trust. She spoke kindly. She used we the way a seam uses a backstitch. Strong, secure, unavoidable. I smoothed my napkin until its edges aligned with the plan. I read each bullet. I let the ink find its weight. Then I took from my folder a fresh copy of my rate sheet. Paper slightly rough, corners square. I placed it beside her plan, like two patterns cut from different cloth. Deposits are 40%, non-refundable after fabric is cut. Lead time 6 to 8 weeks. We do not accept payment in exposure. Every client is scheduled in order. I tapped the line about process with my forefinger. My garments are built by hand. The time is part of the integrity. The inside must be as honest as the outside. She leaned back and folded her arms. No one will know if the inside is machine surged, she said. The camera cannot see it. The market does not care. I folded the napkin again and spoke to its tidy corner. I will know. The wearer will feel it when a long day becomes longer. The dress will confess in 10 years when the thread ages. She smiled the way people smile at superstition. She pushed a fountain pen to the center of the table. Sign the partnership outline. We can start introductions next week. I placed the pen neatly above her name. I did not touch it. Ray, I said, my business already has a partner. It is my own standard. My policy is not a mood. It is a boundary. I do not sell speed by subtracting soul. Her mouth tightened, then relaxed. She reached for the water and did not drink. This is not an accusation, she said. It is an opportunity. You could help more women if you produced faster. I nodded. Helping more women is my reason for the table. The way I help is my vow. I slid her plan back across the linen with 2 fingers, gentle as moving lace. I will not sign this, I said. I will sign hems, bar tax, receipts, checks to pay the women who work with me. I will not sign away the inside of a dress to buy a showroom. Silence sat down with us, a third guest who knew our history. The server arrived with salads. Ray thanked her and stared at the square of feta on her fork. She said she did not want us to be on opposite sides. I pointed to the napkin. We are on adjacent tables. Mine is smaller and honest. Yours is larger and careful. Both can eat. She folded her plan, slower now. She slid it into the folio and closed the clasp. You are sure? She asked. I am sure, I said. I keep up with my life. I lifted my glass. We touched rims. The ice clicked again. The sound was clean. When we left, I tucked the square napkin crease into my pocket the way a tailor keeps chalk dust on her thumb, a reminder that lines exist. They help us cut true. Ray came to the studio on a gray afternoon that made the window look like frosted glass. She stood just inside the door, hair damp at the ends, eyes rimmed in the pink that follows a hard night. I was pressing a sleeve head on a jacket for a woman who had waited 3 decades to feel at home in a mirror. Steam rose from the iron and curled like a small animal finding a warm place. I set the iron upright. I reached for the little tin and placed it on the cutting table between us. The lid clicked shut over buttons and letters, and a few kept pearls. She said my name like it weighed more than usual. Mom. She stepped closer. The floor creaked at the knot in the pine. I could see the line at her mouth that appears when she is preventing herself from defending a choice. She opened her hand as if to show me it was empty. I know what I said at Harborview was cruel. The words left before I knew they were mine. I am sorry. I need you to know that I have told people we are fine now. I looked at the tin, the dent in my thimble, the sleeve that needed one more pass of steam. I kept my voice level so it would carry without cutting. Forgiveness is a door that only opens from my side. You do not get to announce it for me. Her face fell a shade. She nodded and lifted her eyes again. Then when? What can I do to fix us? Slow down, I said. Stand with me in the room we actually have. Today, I am busy keeping the shape for someone who has waited her whole life. I gestured to the jacket, to the chalk marks, to the tape draped around my neck like a quiet scarf. This is not a punishment. It is a schedule. My work is how I breathe and how I buy bread. It is also the way I keep myself from shrinking into someone who will say yes to keep a peace that costs too much. She swallowed. Tears balanced but did not fall. She reached toward the tin and hesitated. Then she placed her fingertips on the cool metal as if it were a railing. I know Corinne pushes. I know I push. It is our way of ironing fear. I said that fear is a poor tailor. It cuts corners and calls them style. She let out a breath that sounded like a seam released. We stood with the tin between us, not a wall, a resting point. I picked up the iron. The sleeve took its curve. Cloth remembered itself. Ray stepped back from the table. I will try again, slower. I nodded. Not a pardon, an acknowledgement that she had heard the rules of the room. The bell over the door chimed. My next client arrived. Work resumed. Nothing shattered. County Hall smelled like polish and paper programs. A row of folding chairs faced a low stage trimmed with bunting and a banner stamped with the county crest. Nora wheeled my machine to a side table. I laid out the strip of hand-rolled hem, the seam board, the zipper foot, the dented thimble, and the seam gauge with its crescent nick. A volunteer threaded an extension cord under the skirt of the table. The singer cleared its throat and settled into a polite hum. I pinned a small card with my name to the edge of the cloth. The card looked like a place setting at a long communal table. People drifted past before the ceremony. A child asked if the zipper was magic. I said it behaves because someone asks it to kindly. A man in a county polo ran his fingers just above the French seam and nodded as if he had recognized a cousin. Mr. Alvarez stood near my sign like an oak. Grace from St. Matthew's waved from 2 rows back. Ethan lifted his notebook and smiled as if to say he would write less and watch more. In the mirror of a window, I saw myself plain, not grand, simply right-sized. When the lights warmed, the coordinator stepped to the lectern with a stack of blue ribbons looped over one arm. They were sea blue, the color of a kind sky. She welcomed the room and thanked the sponsors. Then she said a sentence that moved across the seats like a tide that knows every shoreline. Today, we honor the hands that built whole families, hands that cooked and mended, hands that taught and steadied, hands that turned work into shelter and love into habit. The applause began soft and widened. It sounded like pins tapping a glass dish in a kitchen where someone is about to begin. My name was called. I walked up with my thimble in my palm, as if it were a coin for passage. The coordinator pinned the sea blue ribbon at my shoulder. The satin cooled my skin. I felt the weight as permission rather than proof. She asked what I had brought to show. I held up the hem strip and let the needle take a small bite, so the front row could see how the thread hides and holds. The room leaned closer. The sound of the singer stitched a quiet seam between us. I bowed my head the way I bow to a finished lining. Not low, just enough to say thank you. The clapping met me like fabric does when it finds grain. Everything aligned. Private dismissal had its day. Public honor lifted its lamp. I set the thimble back on the table and breathed like a woman standing in her own pattern. 2 evenings after the county hall, I stood in my kitchen and faced the mannequin one last time. The dress rested on it as if on a quiet breath. I checked the zipper tab with 2 fingers. I tapped the bar tack. I smoothed the hip where the last pearl lived. The wooden spoon served as a final clapper. Steam lifted and was gone. I slid the garment bag up and over, silk side the way a room does when someone leaves with the light. Danny's street glowed with early dusk. A trellis of string lights crossed the yard. Folding chairs drew 2 neat crescents around a patch of lawn that had been swept like a floor. The smell of barbecue drifted from a drum smoker. Children chased a soccer ball that kept forgetting which team it belonged to. I carried the dress through the side gate and into a bedroom where cousins had deposited makeup bags and spare shoes. A mirror leaned against a dresser. It had seen school pictures and bad haircuts, and now a wedding. We dressed without hurry. Hooks met eyes. The zipper climbed like a patient tide. The skirt found her hips and settled with the relief of a place long promised. Danny turned toward the mirror. The scratch in the corner of the glass drew a silver line through the hem as if to sign the moment. She took a breath that belonged to her whole body, and then another for good measure. The neckline honored her collarbones. The waist allowed room for dinner and laughter. The skirt remembered that dancing shoes come off at 10. When she stepped onto the back porch, the yard noticed. Conversations paused the way bees pause at the edge of a flower. The string lights seemed to lower themselves so they could listen. Her fiancé forgot his joke and held out both hands. The photographer lifted the camera and then lowered it for 1 second to let his face understand what the lens would see. The smoker sent up a ribbon of spice and oak that caught in the pearls like fragrance. Danny's mother reached for me before she reached for the aisle. Her palm was warm and certain. She looked at the dress. She looked at my face. She said, "My girl walked through your kitchen to become a bride. Thank you for letting our house borrow your hands." I nodded and felt something unclench across my chest. The dress did not perform. It kept a promise. It wrapped not just Danny, but the family that would hold her after the chairs were stacked and the lights were wound back on their spool. The backyard exhaled. Someone laughed softly. The future felt close enough to hem. I packed the mending kit the way you pack a small mercy. A slim tin, one fine needle waxed with beeswax, a length of silk thread, a single warm ivory button, and a square of paper with a sentence in my careful hand. When you are ready to mend, I am here. I wrapped the tin in brown paper. I tied it with kitchen twine. I left it on Ray's stoop before the sun had burned the street dry. No doorbell, no text. The world already holds enough noise. Morning brought her to my studio with the weather still on her hair. She stood by the window where the curtain has hung with one button missing since winter, a gap that made the fabric sag like a tired mouth. She reached into her coat and set the tin on the cutting table between us. Her fingers hesitated at the lid. Then she opened it. The needle lay across the thread like a bridge. The button looked back with its small, honest face. Ray did not ask permission. She reached for the curtain as if she had always known the cloth. I handed her the thimble, dent first, a familiar weight in a new hand. Pain means you wear the thimble. You do not throw away the needle. I had said it when she was 7. I let it stand again without ceremony. She threaded in one try. She made a knot no bigger than a sesame seed. She found the empty place and took the first bite of fabric. The sound was the soft pop a good cloth makes when it yields and then forgives. She stitched without hurry. 4 neat passes, a cross that looked like a small compass settling on north. No apology, no argument, only the work of joining what wanted to be joined. I watched the curtain lift its edge and keep its shape again. Ray clipped the thread with my little scissor. She set the thimble down and rested her hand on the tin like a person finishing a sentence they were afraid to say out loud. She looked at me, not upward like a child, straight across like a woman. "Thank you," she said. I nodded. The room stayed whole. When she left, I turned off the iron. I placed the button tin beside the singer where the enamel is worn to a dull shine. The studio exhaled. That day in the hotel, someone said the dress did not fit. It turns out not fitting was the old mold I had worn too long. I slipped it off in silence. My back has never been straighter. Before we say goodbye, we would love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Tell us in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to join a community that believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. If you have ever been laughed at for something you made with your whole heart, share it below. Do you think I was too firm or just firm enough to keep my shape?